Hello, Lissa DeHart here, and welcome to the coaching studio. Today, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Antoinette Braks from MCC with the International Coaching Federation as my guest here today on the studio. Antoinette, thank you so much for being a guest today. I really appreciate you showing up.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's a delight to be here. I'm looking forward to having a chat together.
Yeah, and it was a little bit of a rough start given that I lost electricity, but we're navigating the waters of uncertainty in the moment. So thank you for being so patient with that. So as you know, I really want to get a chance to, and have the listeners get a chance to get to know who you are as a person and sort of that journey that you've made as to MCC in your own coaching process. What led you into coaching and made that something that you were interested in?
I think I was led into it quite naturally, to be honest. When I was about 30, I discovered a sense of inner purpose about people realizing their potential. And I called my first company Realize, and really it was all about that. And later in my career, I was with Korn Ferry, about 10 years later, to be honest. And there I was involved in a lot of management assessment, which automatically led into the development of their leadership coaching practice. So, everything just kept on building one after the other. And, when I was 50, I started to devote myself to executive coaching exclusively. I got into vertical leadership development and I loved it. Did a Ph.D. to really explore it. And, that's really my love is my part of my life.
Yeah. It's so interesting how everybody has that sort of journey that brings them to coaching. And I think, what I'm hearing you say is that you got into it and then there was a deeper dive that really happened as you really explored more fully leadership. What did you discover around leadership that was so, captured your imagination and your passion?
We depend on leaders to create our world. And I'm probably coming to your answer from a thinking perspective of where I am now rather than when I was there, because there you just sort of follow the breadcrumbs, right?
Yeah.
Have aspiration. Go, okay, that'll be good, and off I go. But I think particularly from a coaching point of view, we guide leaders and leaders shape our world. We're behind the scenes really, but simultaneously we can play a huge role, I think, because we can affect so many leaders. And if we can have more leaders stepping up in terms of transcending the chaos we're in today and create a better world for us, that's the most critical thing I think we can do in the world today.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. I remember having a conversation with another coach one time, and she was mentioning, the work that she was doing within organizations. It impacted so many more lives than if she were working one-on-one with an individual. Not that that isn't epically important, but just the exponential capacity for change within an organization when you're working with leaders. So I really appreciate that. When you began coaching, and I am going to ask you to maybe kind of go back in Mr. Peabody's way back machine to when you first started coaching towards today, how has your perception about coaching shifted through the years?
I think it's shifted a lot from being a service provider to being a partner with your client organization or executive coachee. I think we've underestimated the impact we can have as coaches. And a lot of coaches struggle commercially in order to really stabilize their business. And I think that affects us as well. So somehow or other, because we're on the outside looking in, it's a challenge for us to step up and really partner. So literally be leading, co-leading, co-creating with the executive coach. I also think our executive coaching methodologies need an upshift too. So we do at StageSHIFT, we do something called transformative coaching as opposed to developmental coaching. It's also called third generation or conscious coaching. And it just puts the subject matter between the coach and coachee. So the coach holds the we space and also generates ideas and insights through their later stage vertical capacity to facilitate growth in the mindset of the coachee. Whereas a developmental coach will ask open, clear questions, and most of our ICF and EMCC are still sort of caught there. But I think there's an upshift for us as well.
Can you speak more about that upshift? Like, what would a question look like? I mean, and that may be too difficult to sort of kind of create a little scenario, but what would that look like if you're working with a leader and you're in this third generational space?
I think the difference is, well, there's quite a number of differences, but I'll start with a couple of them. With a developmental coach, you're honoring the person to come up with all their own resources, use all their own resources to find their own answers, right? Mm-hmm. In transformative coaching, you're using more diagnostic skills to identify underlying recurring patterns and then present them from a psychodynamic point of view to the client, who go, oh, yes, because now they can see what they couldn't see before. Mm-hmm. So it's bringing the consciousness of the coach more into the space.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you, oh, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you. Say that again.
That's also, and therefore they can access also a deeper sense of their own sense of inner truth.
Yeah. I really appreciate that, because I mean, what I'm hearing is also that sense of you're looking from, you have a different lens in which you're seeing a space that is between the coach and the client that the client may not be able to see at all because they're so immersed in the forest. Mm-hmm. And you know, it's that capacity of the coach to bring their informed curiosity into the space, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yes, I would say that, and also their sense of what's going on in the inner world of the executive you're coaching. Mm-hmm. Because our life experience manifests as a result of who we are as in terms of our self-expression and self-awareness. It's our life experience. So we can shift our life experience by cultivating ourself. So we look at both the systemic of the coachee, but as well as the self of the system in terms of shadow resolution, aspirational intent, and all sorts of things that go beyond your everyday reality to really starting to use consciousness to mold your world.
That's a really, it's such an interesting concept, and I absolutely am I love the idea that you're presenting, and I think that really is a shift that is happening in coaching, where we're really bringing more of our, whether it's somatics or energetically, we're noticing things from more a broader lens, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it, so that we're not just asking a simple question, but we're actually, it may still be a simple question, but we're also bringing in our own experience of the moment, even in the moment that we find ourselves. Is that connecting with what you're talking about, or am I missing the mark bit?
Yeah, well, just a tiny bit. I mean, we do bring our experience and everything into play, but the more absent we are as a coach, right? Mm-hmm. The more present we are for the coachee. So it's actually, I think it's diagnostic in terms of the psychodynamics. It's looking at the source of the challenges and emotional triggers that are coming into play to heal. Because when we do this fourth person perspective from a vertical point of view to become a synergist, we have to do a lot of personal shadow resolution and healing, as well as a really big intersystemic. We've got to step up onto a bigger stage. And a lot of executives are a little bit shy of doing that because there's career risk and all sorts of other things that are at play. So to actually support that, step up and self shadow resolution, that really shifts the goalposts.
How does that impact? I mean, so, you're a new coach and you're coming into coaching, and you're now sort of hearing that the landscape is shifting on what is possible with coaching. How do you see that impacting people's evolution as a coach themselves? Like, what's required of them personally in order to be able to, from your perspective, like, get into these shadow spaces with the clients that they're working with?
Yeah, they have to do it for themselves first. So they need to invest in their own vertical, holistic leadership development. I used to read lots of books on psychology and realizing your potential and Jung and all that sort of thing to really appreciate who we are as we evolve in the world. So that we're not just dealing with the challenges in our lives, but we're actually evolving as we're shifting through in terms of our own journey. So, that's more than your standard coaching training. That's all about self-investment.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that, because I think, I think it's one of the things that we don't ask of coaches, and I don't think we even ask it of counselors and therapists and psychologists, and so I'm a social worker. It isn't necessarily mandatory that we get self-reflective work and a self-reflective process where we're really exploring ourselves. And I agree with you, until we have started to have the capacity to hold that space for ourselves, it's very difficult to hold it authentically with anybody else.
You just can't.
Yeah,
you just don't have the compassion, or you can't hold it for another person. If you can't hold another person's pain because you've resolved your own, because it brings up the pain, then you're not a healing instrument. You're actually so you have to be. So if you're a young coach, take your time, but keep on going in terms of your own vertical development.
Yeah, and get coaching more than just solution focused coaching, but rather insight oriented coaching, so that you can work on those things to your point. If somebody brings up something painful that's triggering to you as painful, you don't want to have that transference of your pain onto them and not be able to hold the space. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's just a really important developmental step if we want to be able to create a space that allows for sustainable changes. Also, because if we're not dealing with what's under the current, right, then we're just dealing with actions and results, which don't necessarily have a sustainable change attached to them, because we default back to what we know. For you personally, as you look at your own coaching journey, what has been the biggest challenge for you in your own journey?
I think it's the continual self-evolution. When you put yourself into an evolutionary space by setting some sort of aspirational intention to contribute to serve the world in some way, you're in constant play. And it means you step out of the commercial reality of, okay, I'm doing things for income and just ensuring that I've got my budget, my income covered and all that sort of thing, and my family and my friends. You're actually moving into being an instrument of evolution. And that means you become instrumental in your own evolution. So that can take a lot of courage. It can take a lot, you get huge challenges. You need to surrender ultimately. So your path you take is just more challenging. But I also believe that I've experienced that as we evolve, our life experience also becomes more effortless. We're not so much a doing, but we're more a becoming, and then we become a being where things happen through us and as us. So there's a lot of work getting there, but with the support and guidance of people to help you, we can become more fully who we are.
Beautifully said. And I do agree with you. I mean, I think the challenge is that we have to overcome our fear. And so many human beings have these internal narratives that are less than useful, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it, and that end up really stopping us from being willing to go into what might potentially be an uncomfortable place or painful place. So yeah, that courage is so important, I think, that you mentioned.
I'm glad you said courage there, because there's also a boldness about it. There's a boldness about challenging our clients to step up.
Mm-hmm.
By saying, there's sustainability outcomes that we're not addressing. Let's look at those. There's an empowering or liberating of the workplace that we need to, because if they're strategic leaders, these are the sort of things they're responsible for. And a lot of them don't see themselves as accountable for culture, for instance, whereas they are accountable for the culture in their organizations. And, bringing the people engagement up to over 80% is absolutely doable. Let's start rising to that. So for coaches to be bolder in almost challenging their client executives and client organizations to really step up, particularly now with all the chaos going on in the world. I mean, we're not going to thrive if we don't.
Right. And I mean, and I think that that courage that really equates into that boldness. I heard a coach once say, and I honestly, I don't remember who it was who said this, but they said, be willing to ask a question you might get fired for, right? Like, be willing to ask these bolder questions. And that takes a developmental courage, a evolutionary courage, that you explored these places where you can, I mean, they talk about even in the competencies that you kind of offer lightly, like you're not super attached, you're going to ask the question, but you're not super attached to the outcome of the question, in the sense that it's being willing, though, to ask the question. And I think the other piece of it, to your earlier point, if you haven't done the work, you don't know what the question is to ask.
No, it's right. You can't guide someone over terrain you haven't already explored. And in fact, once you've done the terrain yourself, you can see the signposts that they can't see. And you say, hey, there might be a challenge there down the road, or, look out for this abyss. You don't want to fall in there.
It's about to get bumpy.
Yeah. And there's also the boldness of the executive leader to start to transform their system. We go from self to system, and then the complex adaptive system, that intersystemic reality. So to start operating as the system, to re-engineer it, that again is what a coach can really help with. Not simply doing developmental questions for the executive, but addressing their organizational imperatives in terms of evolving there as well. Because, even moving to the 4-day work week in the virtual space instead of the workplace, it's going to require more empowerment, which means more letting go, which means different types of systems to support the team coherence. So all of that needs to be brought into play, I think, and can be done so through coaching, I think, even more effectively than consulting.
Yeah, well, and that's interesting, because as you were talking, I was thinking, speaking to all the consulta coaches who are out there, who really want to be able to tell people sort of, this is what you need to do. And they have the experience of being an executive themselves, yet they haven't necessarily done this evolutionary work that you're talking about. How does that then how does that then impact the coaching relationship from your perspective?
That sounds more like a mentor than a coach, really, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And more, maybe even a developmental coach at a stretch, rather than a transformative coach. So I think a transformative coach works at the deep levels of self, and works on the organizational system as well as the person, in terms of what's happening to them day by day. So deeper, wider, broader.
I like that. Deeper, wider, broader.
Which means the coach needs to be really educated as well, needs to read about what's going on in our ecosystems and our sustainability and our poverty gap and our health, all these socio-economic issues. If we're not informed in those, we don't understand the strategic context within which an organization is playing. Mm-hmm. So becoming really informed, not just on our expertise as a coach, but on what's happening in our world, or the world of our coachees. And organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's the piece that keeps it also relevant, is that we understand the systems within the systems within the systems, and we have a greater sense of understanding there. One of the things that I'm hearing you talk about, and I'd love to hear you elaborate on, is really, how do you keep yourself doing this continually? What allows you to be in the space of that self-exploration and the exploration of the world around you, so that you can show up as a co-creative partner with your clients?
I think we at StageSHIFT, we have an architecture that I've developed over about probably 20 years, but anyway, it's been distilled and fine-tuned, and something such as a visionary purpose that is aspirational, purposeful, visionary, and having something like that embedded and embodied in your self-awareness, that facilitates life experiences that, if you pay attention to what is happening and transpiring, you can direct and shape yourself, reshape, or influence what's happening around you. So I think I'm in that constant radar. It's there all the time. Yeah. So life shapes me and self shapes life. They become interpenetrative. So I don't think most people realize the extent to which we can shape our lives by shaping ourselves.
Yeah.
or reshaping ourselves or transforming ourselves. And that really throws you into the transforming mind, where you're consistently, continuously transforming and inviting it, you know, inviting more, give me more.
Back to the boldness and courage.
Yeah, you know, and I have various spiritual and other practices that I do to continue to sustain that frequency of being in play.
Yeah. Yeah, it is that willingness to be self-reflective on a regular basis and to constantly be testing your assumptions about the world around you and the people around you and yourself within the space. And again, I mean, I really, going back to the words you used earlier, is courage and boldness on the part of the coach with themselves before with their clients even, is really is part of that journey, if I'm hearing you correctly.
Yeah, to trust whatever's arising, that it's arising for us to share. You know, this is assuming our ego is absent and our self is fully, you know, put away, and we're just acting as an instrument for the coach. The self is an instrument for the coachee. Then to trust whatever is arising intuitively or systemically, to share that in a really gracious way. So being bold doesn't mean being fierce, although there's a sense of fierce compassion that I enjoy. But there is a sense of gracious invitation, you know, wonder if. Yeah.
Gracious invitation. Yeah, and I agree with you. I'm not using the word bold as in you need to be fierce, but rather I love gracious invitation. But also maybe even it's the boldness of stepping outside of your fear, if you know,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Or at least stepping past the fear once you've assessed that the fear isn't really telling you something useful. Like there's a tiger, right? Like, okay, be afraid then.
Yeah, no. We all need to transcend our own fears, and because once we've done that, we can enable the coachee to transcend their fears, because they're going to be fearful. When you're offering a very gracious invitation, it's something that's scary. I think, oh, okay, yeah, you know, it's putting them outside of their comfort zone, so they need some frameworks and techniques to help them. I think that's what we offer as well, but because otherwise you're going in with a lot of career risk. So learning how to do what to do with some proven techniques can also really help your client organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Shifting gears slightly, I mean, you strike me as someone who's had a very interesting life. What is something we would never guess about you just by meeting you?
I think I've been informed by a couple of like big things. And one, I've been a single parent of 3 children from the ages of 1, 3, and 5, and now they're all around 30. So I think, and I've, you know, so that's one element. I've traveled around the world continuously with them in tow. So I've been a single parent. There haven't been 2 parents, it's just been one. So I'm an international traveler, and now I'm a digital nomad. I live out of a suitcase. I travel to where the work is. I've been in Europe for the last 3 years since 2020, 2019, in fact. In 2020, I was set to go back to Australia, but I ended up staying here. So I've become free to live my life in as fulfilling way as I can, particularly now before I have become a grandmother, which will, you know, 5 to 10 years time, that's on the horizon. So I'm just making the most of who I am, you know, and I've been single for so long as well, which is sort of ridiculous. But I think it's because I have a very resilient spirit and a very strong spirit who is not prepared to compromise what I'm giving. And it's taken me this long, I think, also to resolve my own past and my own ancestral shadow and to move through that to just be who I've become today.
Yeah.
Which so far.
Yeah. And it sounds like a real comfort in like just the knowing of yourself and the being in your own skin.
Yeah, absolutely. Having an inner home as opposed to an outer home.
Yeah, I love that. Digital nomad, inner home. What is something that you would share, one bit of wisdom that you might share with a new coach on maybe somebody wanting to become a masterful coach, whether or not it's an MCC or not is, you know, sort of not the issue, but just really masterful in their own coaching. Is there like a first step that you would offer them?
I would say to all coaches today, as I say to all leaders today, vertical leadership development is the fastest growing theme in leadership development, because we need to go to the next level. In terms of Einstein, you can't solve the problems. So all the problems we're facing in the world today, the geopolitical instability, you know, all the economic crises from the pandemic, there's so much climate change, there's so much going on, and everything's interconnected. So I think I'd encourage every single person to invest in their vertical leadership development, and we offer vertical holistic leadership development, so it's brought more broadly into consciousness, in order for us, people on the planet, to rise. You know, because we need to transcend all these issues, embrace them and transcend them, and reset our foundations of society. I think it's such a massive quantum shift, and we're starting to realize it. You know, education institutions, health, hospitals, they haven't moved for over about maybe 100 years. Some of the technology has changed, but the way we manage it from an infrastructural point of view hasn't.
Yeah.
You know? And now we're moving,
I think we're really seeing that in the world today too, that the systems don't want to change, and yet ultimately the change needs to happen in order to move forward. What are you passionately involved with today?
Today, over the last few years, I've been developing a StageSHIFT global coaching community. We have about 50 coaches now in all countries of the world, including, you know, Russia, Russia, Asia, all over Europe. So all sorts of languages, and all of them are later stage coaches at like Synergist Plus, and all very experienced. So we're pivoting now to client organizations and bringing our collaborative capacity together with online resources to lead transformation for strategic leaders and their organizations. So that's, I'm still so passionate about that. I think I've got another good 10 years in me yet. So.
Yay. Well, and the grandbabies haven't started coming in yet, so you still got some.
Plenty of time. Well, they'll also have to be sequestered into holiday periods, I think.
I gotta find time for everything. Where can people find you when they're looking?
I think, well, I'm on LinkedIn, obviously, but on the StageSHIFT.coach website, there's loads of resources. There's loads of articles. You can get the first 2 chapters of my book there. You can find out all about vertical development there. It's not just my stuff, it's other authors as well. So and we have a StageSHIFT Coaching Certification Program coming up in September. And we also have a vertical holistic leadership profile assessment, which is a great vertical leadership assessment, all automated online for, you know, client executives. So yeah, there's lots of stuff there that people could go and have a look around at.
Yeah, I'll be putting the link in the notes below so people can just easily find your website also. So as we move into closing today, if you were writing your autobiography, what would you have the title of that be?
I think it's got something to do with consciously evolving.
Beautiful, beautiful. Antoinette, thank you so much for being on the coaching studio today. I've absolutely appreciated this conversation. And again, just thank you so much for being the guest today.
And Lisa, thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely. Thank you.
You're very welcome.